It was supposed to be a quiet evening, one of those ordinary nights where life feels still, almost serene, like a river gently winding its way through familiar paths. The kind of evening where nothing shifts, nothing breaks, and certainly nothing explodes. But for Mark, this night would spiral into something far darker. What began as routine would descend into a storm so fierce it would change everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and the person he had vowed to spend his life with. For months, Mark had been living under the heavy cloud of suspicion. Subtle at first, like a faint tremor before an earthquake. His wife, Claire, the woman he had built his life with, the one he loved without question, had begun to shift in ways he couldn't quite explain. She had always been his anchor, his partner, his best friend. But recently she had become distant, evasive. Missed calls began to stack up, late-night meetings bled into the early hours, and her smile, once so genuine, now felt rehearsed, painted on like a mask hiding something rotten beneath. Mark tried to reason with himself, convincing his heart that it was paranoia, that he was overthinking. But her actions were growing more suspicious by the day. She would come home wearing perfumes he didn't recognize, her clothes faintly smelling of places Mark had never been. Her phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, now never left her side. Passwords changed. Conversations whispered behind closed doors. A life slowly being concealed from the man who had once known her better than anyone. What gnawed at Mark the most was Thomas, her colleague, someone who had been around their family for years. Mark had never questioned his presence until recently. The way Thomas looked at Claire had shifted, subtle but sharp. Lingering touches on the small of her back. The kind of eye contact that lasted a fraction too long. Smiles that felt loaded with something more than friendship. Mark's gut screamed louder each time they were together, and it became impossible to ignore. Then the final blow. One night, as Claire left for yet another business dinner, an anonymous email landed in Mark's inbox. The subject line hit like a sledgehammer. "You deserve to know." With trembling hands, Mark opened it. Inside were photographs, cold, unforgiving evidence. Claire, laughing, wrapped in the arms of another man. At first, Mark didn't recognize him. But then, as if the truth had been waiting to leap from the shadows, it became clear. It was Thomas. The man who had shared their table, their laughter, their life. The man Mark had welcomed into their home. The photos were taken in intimate places. An upscale hotel in the city, a dimly lit bar tucked away from prying eyes, a quiet park bench where they sat too close for it to be innocent. There was no mistaking what these images were saying. Claire had been living a double life. And Thomas was not just a colleague, he was her secret. The betrayal felt like a dagger through the chest. The confirmation of everything Mark had feared. And in that instant, something inside him cracked. There was devastation, yes. But beneath the surface of pain, another feeling began to rise, cold, slow-burning rage. Not the impulsive kind that ends in shouting or slamming doors. No, Mark's anger was patient. Calculated. He didn't want a messy argument or fleeting revenge. He wanted something lasting. Something unforgettable. In the days that followed, Mark became a ghost in his own life. Present but not really there. He moved with purpose but spoke little. He spent his nights alone in their guest room, scrolling through messages, planning. Watching Claire lie to him with eyes he once thought incapable of deception. But he didn't confront her. Not yet. He wanted this to be perfect. Mark began tracking her every move, when she left, where she went, who she saw. He took notes. He followed patterns. Claire's secret world was fragile, a house of cards held together by arrogance and the belief that she'd never be caught. Mark only needed to pull the right thread. When he was ready, he set his plan into motion. He invited Claire to dinner at their favorite restaurant. A beautiful place filled with memories of anniversaries, birthdays, and quiet, tender moments they once shared. She accepted with excitement, completely unaware that the night she thought would rekindle their love would instead burn everything to ash. That evening, Claire arrived wearing the dress Mark had always loved. She smiled at him with those same eyes that once held his entire world. She laughed, commented on the wine, played her part with grace. But Mark, seated across from her, saw right through it. He wasn't the man she once knew anymore. He had become something sharper, something unbreakable. As she chatted, Mark excused himself, saying he needed the restroom. But instead of heading toward the back hallway, he slipped into a private room he had reserved, where Thomas was already waiting, growing increasingly uneasy. When Mark entered, Thomas's face went pale. The smugness he often carried was gone. There was fear in his eyes now. "What's going on, Mark?" Thomas asked, his voice shaking. Mark stared at him coldly. "You know exactly what this is." Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but Mark cut him off with a raised hand. "Save it. I don't need your lies." Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. And just as Thomas began to stammer an excuse, the door opened again. Claire walked in. Her heels clicked softly against the floor. She froze when she saw them both. Her eyes darted between her husband and her lover, the color draining from her face. She knew instantly that the walls had collapsed. The truth had found her. Mark stood tall, his voice low but laced with ice. "Did you really think you could cheat on me, and get away with it?" Claire's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Her body trembled. Tears welled in her eyes, but Mark felt nothing. No pity. No regret. Just clarity. He pulled out his phone and pressed play. The screen came alive with video clips. Claire and Thomas, their stolen moments captured and preserved. The hotel. The bar. The kisses. The betrayal in high definition. "This," Mark said, turning the phone toward them, "is going to every person who ever looked at you and thought you were honest. Our friends. Our families. Everyone." Claire dropped to her knees, sobbing, broken. Thomas stood paralyzed, shame washing over him. The room was silent, but the destruction was complete. Mark had shattered their facade with precision. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need to strike. The truth was a sharper weapon than anything else he could have used. And just like that, Mark walked away. He left Claire and Thomas behind in that private room, surrounded by the ruins of their deceit. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. They would carry that night with them for the rest of their lives. They would never forget how it felt to be exposed, humiliated, undone. For Mark, the pain remained, but so did the power. He had taken control back. He had rewritten the end of their story not as the victim but as the author. And as Claire lived each day haunted by the fallout of her choices, Mark stepped into a future that, while forever changed, no longer belonged to lies.